Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now let's go to part two, and that is a comment made by Jerry Boyer. He said that retail sales, if they were to soften a little, and the costs that businesses had were to soften a lot, and input costs, that is the price of commodities and such, was to soften a lot, or a moderate amount, you would see huge changes in profits. Mr. Boyer, where did you learn about economics? Have you run a business? I think that's a fair question, because you're slightly misstating reality here. As a business owner and somebody who ran a fairly large company for 15 years, I can tell you that this is just absolute hogwash. First off, there's two kinds of costs in business. There are fixed costs, which comprise things like mortgages, and then there are variable costs, the most important of which is employees, that is manpower. Your fixed costs are typically not easily knocked down to size. In other words, it is very difficult to get rid of a building that you have a mortgage on in the middle of that mortgage. Yeah, you can go out and try to sell it, but in a flat to down market, you're not going to get nearly as much as you would think you would. If you're leasing space, there's typically quite a penalty if you can even get out of the lease at all. And if you sublease, this assumes that you can find someone who will take that piece of property and sublease it from you at a reasonable price. In a market where commercial vacancies are rising rapidly, that's not very likely either. So these fixed costs go on every month regardless of whether or not you sell anything at all. Variable costs, such as labor, are another matter entirely. Certainly you can fire employees, and if you do that, for a while you will see very good earnings. After all, if I have Alexander over here in the corner make a bunch of widgets for me, and then I can him, as long as I still have the widgets that Mr. Alexander made to sell, I make a great deal more profit on those widgets that I report in subsequent periods. The problem, of course, is that Mr. Alexander doesn't work for me anymore, and when I run out of inventory, when I run that inventory back down, I've got a little problem. Mr. Alexander isn't there to make some new ones. So now I either have to hire Mr. Alexander back, in which case my cost savings was illusory, or the other alternative is I have to try to get the other people that I currently have on my line to make those additional widgets that Mr. Alexander made for me previously. If I can push productivity in this sort of a fashion without driving up labor costs, that is, for example, paying overtime, then I might be able to win. But if I can't, I've got myself a little bit of a problem. So when we look at this and we say, well, earnings will come in great, we have to look at things from a standpoint of, are they really going to come in great? The truth of the matter is that when you take the revenue down by 30% in most businesses, the loss of profits is not 30%. It's much larger. In fact, in most cases, it could be total, because the fixed costs don't go away rapidly, if at all. And that becomes a major problem. There is always a certain amount of overhead in any business that you really can't get rid of. You need to have a certain number of people around just to keep the organizational structure in place, regardless of how much you produce. So I find that a rather disingenuous comment. Secondly, retail sales down a little? Excuse me, Harley-Davidson's revenue, in terms of, if you look at total number of motorcycles sold, wasn't down a little, it was down 30%. That's not a small number, Mr. Boyer. And if you look at some of the other numbers that we're seeing for revenue, they're not small either. General Electric down nearly 20%, or was it 17, 18%? That's a big decline, Mr. Boyer. And oh, by the way, is there a company that is more representative of the large multinational conglomerate in the world economy than General Electric? I don't think so. Is there a company that more represents the health of America today than General Electric? I don't think so. And yet, General Electric is not alone. Marriott is a very well-known international hotelier, and yet their RevPAR, that is revenue per room, was down about 18% in their most recent quarterly report. Now, it is true that these are year-over-year numbers, and it is also true that in October we're going to start seeing what are called easier comparisons. But ladies and gentlemen, is this really about easier comparisons, or is this about looking at things from where we've come from the top down to where we are now? See, I would argue that the question about gross domestic product, if you want to look at real gross domestic product, that is the real value of all goods and services in the economy that are actually consumed, you have to look at the reports of those businesses that are out there in terms of where we are from the top to the bottom. Not where we are in terms of sequential growth, because here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, if you look at the stock market is currently trading, what, about 940 as of the close on Friday? The top was at 1576 on the S&P 500, down to 940. Well, I mean, that's fairly close to 1,000. Let's say 1,500 to 1,000, okay? So what is that? That's about a 30% decline, 33%, about a third. Yeah, we were down a lot more than that. We were, down at 666. That's really nasty. That's more than half. But here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. Do you really believe that the profit level of American business is only going to fall by 30%? More importantly, what's the growth rate? Because where is that growth going to come from? Where, if we go down 30% on shipments, does that mean that we would only make 30% less profit? No, we'd make quite a bit less than 30%. So I have a real problem with the idea that we ought to be trading in this general area based upon this, that profits are going to be fantastic and they're going to continue. And furthermore, I have another issue with this, and this is the point that I was trying to bring up, but just simply didn't have the time. Since this is a credit-driven recession, we've got a major problem on our hands with regards to credit. And going forward, this is going to turn into an even bigger problem. You see, we can't grow the economy until the debt service is taken out. Now, there's only a couple of ways to do that. One would be to slowly earn it down. That is, what we tried to do with the banks by shoving all this stuff under the carpet and pretending that it didn't exist. But that will take years, maybe a decade or more. And in the process, we're going to see 1%, maybe 1.5%, maybe not even 1% economic growth on average over those times. Because consumers and businesses are going to have to divert their resources that would otherwise go into R&D, production, and investment in order to pay off this debt. And until we pay it off and get our accounts back in balance, we're not going to be seeing economic growth anywhere near trend or anywhere near capacity. The second thing we can do is to force all of this bad debt out in the open and default it. That actually removes it very quickly, and then we are able to resume growth. Now, the problem is people say, well, but that bankrupts these large banks. Well, it's true, it does. But is this necessarily a bad thing? Ladies and gentlemen, is there not a local bank in your town? Are there not bankers that would be happy to have your loan business instead of Bank of America, Citibank, or JP Morgan? I think there are. And furthermore, if we were to have such a thing happen, in addition to bankrupting both the consumers and the businesses that made these bad loans, in other words, both the borrowers and the lenders, in addition to that, all of that loan business, not having the competition from JP Morgan, Bank of America, and Citibank, would go into the local lending environment. These are hometown businesses. They employ hometown people. Their business volume would increase, and while we would have people fired in New York City, we would have people hired in Main Street, USA. We can choose, ladies and gentlemen. We can either protect the foolish and at the same time damage our economy even further, or we can insist that companies like Goldman Sachs that manage to figure out a way to imprudently borrow effectively billions of dollars from AIG by buying credit default swaps that were uncovered, and then when that bet went bad, get the taxpayer to pay off something that they purchased that was worthless. Or we can force all of these people to eat their own cooking and divert that business back into the local economy of this country where it belongs. Spur employment in the economy where it belongs. Yes, there is an adjustment that has to take place, ladies and gentlemen, and the amount of pain economically that has to take place is immense. The question is whether or not we want to do it slowly or quickly, and whether or not we want to protect those people that made the bad decisions, or whether or not we want to protect people that made good decisions. That's my opinion, and I'm your ticker guy.